Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn webinar panel series that we're continuing on for 2025. We're brought to you by Profitmaster Global Outsourcing. I do have the CEO and founder here. I've got Richard Croaker with us as one of our panel members, and I've got Keeley Press as well from SLF Lawyers also joining us. My name is Paul Jans, in case you don't know, and it's great to have all of you here for a session that we're going to be talking about again. It's sort of an interesting topic that's been in the news, these, let's call it the risks of hiring offshore team members directly. We know a number of businesses are doing it. We're going to talk about some of the reasons why. We're going to talk about some of the, call it the risks versus rewards in this situation, or certainly the benefits of using a provider like a Profitmaster. And then we're going to delve a little bit into, let's call it this great debate that we tend to have around contractor or employee. And just because you have a contractor agreement, it doesn't mean that they are a contractor. And Fair Work Commission has actually ruled in the favour of that person, certain people being employees. So I've got Keeley here to specifically talk about that. So I think what we'll do is, let's get into this. Richard and Keeley, how are you? Welcome.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Paul.
It's good. Good to see you again.
Paul, how are you?
I'm good, Rich. How you doing, mate?
Good. Last time we did this, I was in the Philippines. At least I'm at home today.
Yeah, that's right. And you're back now. Yeah. You're on the GC with Keeley.
I am indeed.
Yes.
Well, again, to everybody that's listening, that's joined us, there'll be a Q&A section. We'll probably go for about 30, 35 minutes. So if you've got questions, please throw them into the Q&A. We'll allow time at the end for any sort of questions that you may have. So please make sure if you've got any questions that you hear as we're going to certainly talk about them. Now, Rich, I'll go to you first. Look, it's an interesting topic. It's a hot topic. I mentioned this before because I know the ABC article came out again only maybe last week, I think it was, with regards to a particular case, I suppose, the ongoing risks for Australian employees that are choosing to hire directly. Keeley, I'm happy for you to jump in with any comments that you might have as well, please, at any stage. We know a number of clients. I think it came out in our first session that we ran 4 weeks ago, which, people are choosing to hire directly, mainly because of cost. Let's call it for what it is. People are saying, well, we don't need to use a provider. We'll pay out the company and we'll go directly and we'll have 10 or 15. I know I've spoken to a number of different accounting firms as an example that have got 10 team members that are hired directly through contractor arrangement, not through an MSA. So again, these are the sorts of things. Now, if that's the number one reason to save costs, that's what I want to break down today. I want to sort of talk about the benefits of, let's say, the risks and their benefits then to using a provider like Profitmaster Global. So, Rich, when hiring directly, we spoke about the number one reason could be saving costs, but what do employers lose out on when they choose to go directly? Let's talk that cost versus value or benefits.
So when we're talking about hiring directly, we're not only talking about a direct relationship contractually between the Australian client and the person working offshore. That's not the only part, but the other part of that is almost always they're working from home. So they're not working in an office. So look, I think there's a couple of things that you can start off with. One of them is that the staff don't have the opportunity to work in an office environment where in Australia, we're already recognising the advantages of working in an office in terms of a collegiate relationship, the ability to collaborate more easily in relation to things, and even things like career development on behalf of the staff that are working offshore. So that's just one of the things. And it was interesting, Paul, you mentioned about cost. You or I were in Melbourne last week and in Brisbane the week before, and we got to speak with a number of people who are doing this face-to-face. And I posed the question, what is the reason that you're going directly? And it was exactly right. Most of it was about the cost. And sure, if you're paying somebody a single direct amount, then that's fine. What the staff miss out on, or what the team member misses out on, I'm very careful not to use the word staff member in this context, but what the team member misses out on are things like potentially holiday pay, superannuation or the equivalent of superannuation, the equivalent of Medicare in the offshore environment. In the Philippines, there's another employee-sponsored organisation called Pagi-Big, or the Home Mutual Development Fund. And then there's private health insurance. The team bonding, the team building relationships, staff club, all of that sort of stuff is not provided when you're working in a direct hire relationship. The other things are that usually the computer is provided by the Australian company to the offshore individual, or if it's not, that means the offshore individual is using their own device. And the problems with that, I mean, you can go as far as you want to in relation to that, but simply the security environment in which they're working may or may not be at the level that you particularly want. And the other part of that is not only is it the security level of the data, but also the physical security of the device itself may not be being controlled. The other thing is that HR in a country offshore, the cultural nuances related to the people who are working there compared to the cultural nuances that we have with staff working in Australia, they can be quite different. And I'm not just talking about HR rules and payroll rules, but the culture can be quite different. So one of the other things that you're doing when you're working in a direct hire environment is you're imposing the cultural style of what we have here in Australia onto somebody who may have a totally different cultural style. So, look, there's a number of others, and we're going to go into some of it now, but I'm just trying to lay the groundwork on some of the things that we're talking about why cost may not necessarily be the sole argument that you should be basing a decision on.
Oh, look, I'd agree with you. And I think the key message, certainly from my end of the table last week when we got to talk about it, I think the employers, or certainly the directors of the companies that were on my end, were more worried about the security side. And I think you flagged it just then with regards to, the major risk is probably, yes, the use of the device, what sort of network they're working on, and I know you covered off sort of one of the questions quite well, and that was, what's a closed and open, let's call it a computer. That was the conversation we had as well, in terms of drives and USBs and who are the people that are around them. And, we know fraud's a massive issue, which is then the security side. So you've got two different layers of security there, haven't you?
Between the let's say the direct hire individual and somebody who's working through a provider like Profitmaster, absolutely. And I mean, it's quite simple. Some simple examples might be an environment review before the staff member commences work. And I can speak to the Philippines, but there are other jurisdictions and other countries that have the same issues. But let's talk about the Philippines just for a moment. Typically, a young Filipino graduate is probably living at home, or if they're not, they've just moved out into their own house. They can be quite small. It might be a one-bedroom house that they're living in, or maybe a two-bedroom house. And that bedroom might be one of those bedrooms might be the only place that's got air conditioning in the house. So you certainly need, in a place where you're getting 44 degrees and upwards for heat, you want somebody who's working in an air-conditioned environment to be able to do the work that has to be done. So you've then got the issue of 2 or 3 people being in the same room altogether because they all want the air conditioning. So you've got issues like productivity shortfalls because of people all being in the same room. But let's take it a step further. The reality is that you've got other people looking over your screen to see what's going on. Now, you might say, well, that's not a big deal. It's probably a couple of kids or something like that. But when you're working in an offshore environment, you just don't know. You just don't know. So a simple thing like a privacy screen over the computer so that people looking from the side, people got that. I just mentioned that to people in this group. If you're using work from home direct hire people, you've got a privacy screen so that it can't be seen from side to side. Other things like setting the computer up before its delivery so that the devices that can be hanging off it through the USBs and so on are actually taken away. You can't actually load up anything that could be used as an opportunity to take away data. The internet connection itself through the Wi-Fi connection has to be checked for safety in terms of its connection. And we haven't even started to talk about the data itself And, for our own organisation, we have a high quality security overlay over that we're able to give some level of a high level of comfort to our clients that security is being adhered to. Now, that comes at a cost. You can't just say that that's worth nothing. And so if you take simply the cost that you're paying a staff member, well, just for that physical security, there's something that goes on top of that. Now, for your data security, again, the security overlay over the top of the work from home machine is critical to what we have to look at here in Australia.
Yeah, spot on. And I think I know one of the ladies at the end of our table was talking about also, how do you control the work that they're going to be doing? Do you know that they're not working for 3 other companies on the same device? It's those sorts of areas that you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. Unless you're in front of them, you don't really know that. But mate, let's get to the case for a sec. I'd love you to...
Sorry, just to interrupt there, Paul, because we do know.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good point. But most people wouldn't, if they're directly hiring and they're working from home, they wouldn't know that, would they?
May not.
No.
Yeah. And I was just going to add as well, just on the cost side of it, I think a lot of businesses forget about the financial implications if they get this wrong, and the penalties that get imposed on the businesses. I mean, just by way of reference, right now, the Fair Work Commission will impose penalties, for individuals conducting it at around $20,000 per contravention, going all the way up to $495,000 per contravention for larger businesses. So they're massive costs that you may not foresee by going direct. And that's just something that, businesses can have in the back of their mind of how bad it can get financially if this goes wrong.
It's a great point. Let's talk about that, because there's been obviously a case that has been put forward to the Fair Work Commission. It's the Pasquale case. So Rich, well, I'm happy for anyone that wants to talk about it, but Rich, you okay to go into a little bit of detail about the case?
Certainly.
From memory, it's a legal assistant and was based in the Philippines. So it's a Filipino individual that took their Australian employer for unfair dismissal. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the case was actually handed down in the latter part of last year. I think it was around about August, and it was a young lady in the Philippines, Joanna Pascala. She had been removed from the contract relationship that she had with the labour company of a law firm in Queensland, and she took offence to that and decided that she would take her chances in the Fair Work Commission for unfair dismissal. So it was heard over part of the year last year, and it's again handed down in about August. And it was found that Joanna was in fact an employee of the Australian law firm, and that had consequences in terms of what that meant for the law firm for financial liabilities and the consequent risks associated with it. But also some of the information that was handed down as well covered off on things that we already know about the Fair Work Commission and what is an employee versus a contractor. But look, to her credit, she did an extremely good job. She was able to get that over the line. A lot of people didn't talk about it for a little while. But I know that it's been something we've been speaking about since before Christmas. We notified our clients about it right at the beginning of this year, having been verbally speaking about it last year. It came up in an ABC article last week or the week before. And in actual fact, you're now starting to see our competitors and other people are stepping up to this as well. I'm starting to see discussion going around, speaking with people over there about what the potential consequences are in relation to this. So it's a serious issue, and it's something very much that we need to be talking about.
I agree. And look, for everyone that's online, I did just drop that into the chat bar. So you've got that link that we've been talking about as well. So if you want more information about it, it's public information, so it's important that everybody has the facts, especially since we're talking about that right now. So look, obviously a fascinating decision, considering it was a Filipino contractor that was deemed to be an employee. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what were the impacts, and maybe Keeley, maybe this is where you can come into it in terms of what were some of the results of that decision and then the impact to the Australian employer.
Rich, I'm happy if you want to answer that one.
No, you can go off. I'll give you. No, you go for it.
Yeah, no. Look, obviously, look, obviously, there's this case was appealed and it was overturned as well. So look, there was that occurred, but also with something like this. And what I was going to segue off with the financial side of things is when there's things like that, the implications are that there's then a unfair dismissal claim that gets brought against you, and this is obviously raised as a jurisdictional objection on the basis that, you know, she's not an Australian employee, she's not covered by Australian workplace laws. So once you get past that hurdle, then you have the actual merits of the claim that then get substantiated. It's the reputational fallout that happened for that company. There's back pay, so then you're open to paying all employment entitlements, so annual leave and whatnot. So there's that side of things. Then there's the penalties that we were just talking about before. So if you are found to have contravened the Fair Work Act, then penalties can be imposed on businesses. So these are all things that were results of this case. So it absolutely served as a very good reminder to Australian businesses that workplace laws can absolutely extend internationally.
And I suppose there's the biggest one here is, you know, we started talking about cost, and I know we raised this a month ago as well, and most people would choose one because sometimes we can't find the right people and the right type of people to take up positions here in Australian companies, but then we go to whether it be Vietnam or India or the Philippines as an example, and again that is a cheaper cost, so therefore we're saving on employment costs. But then in this particular case, it was deemed that minimum Australian wages had to be paid as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and she wasn't, from reading the judgment, being paid at that minimum rate. So, you know, all of these things attract penalties. It's not necessarily just sham contracting, it's paying under the minimum rate for Australian wages. So, you know, there's so many little facets of this judgment that so many businesses, because there aren't dedicated arms for many businesses that look at these things, they can be overlooked so easily. But gosh, they have large ramifications.
Massive. So does this bring in the old, you know, again, the old contract versus employee type of scenario?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think that this decision, you know, couldn't have arrived at a more pivotal point in Australian employment laws. It's come straight off the back of massive changes to workplace laws on the 26th of August last year. And, you know, the Fair Work Act now requires constitutional corporations, so anyone with Pty Ltd in their name, to apply that whole relationship test and definitely look beyond those contractual labels that we were used to doing in the last way that the courts tested this classification. And so I think from certainly my perspective, this case highlighted two really crucial questions, and that was, well, which country's laws apply? And to that extent, Australian employment laws are only going to apply when there is a substantial connection. And without that connection, offshore workers would arguably be subject to their local laws instead. So for businesses in this case, considering, are they working for an Australian entity? Are they representing an Australian business? Are they using Australian systems? And these are things that will be considered in deciphering if there's a substantial connection. I guess then that second key question is, well, are they a contractor or are they an employee? And it's important to note that those August 2024 changes shifted this test. So previously, like I said, there was absolutely a focus on contractual terms. And that's what was highlighted in this case. And now there is this whole relationship test, which is looking at substance over form. And that whole relationship test requires examining how the contract is performed in practice and not just what that contract says. So a practical example will be, you know, calling someone a contractor, but treating them like an employee. And that simply just won't hold up anymore, unfortunately. So This case was certainly a wake-up call for businesses, showing how far Australian employment protections will extend, and that businesses can't simply just avoid their obligations by having workers overseas.
Quite amazing, really. So
I just point out there, of course, Keeley, that the Filipinos in this particular case that we're talking about, they have similar obligations over in the Philippines, where there are laws in relation to who is a contractor and who is an employee. And I think that's worth noting as well. And the consequence of it is that the employer or the employer of an employee in the Philippines arguably becomes liable for the benefits, the statutory benefits that may be that should be paid for the employee. A simple example might be in relation to Phil Health, for example, which is an employer-employee contributory scheme that the employer contributions may not have been made. And so there could be liability from that point of view. I won't argue about the jurisdiction of enforcement, but relating to enforcement, but nevertheless, one could argue that that there's a liability being created by not fulfilling obligations over there.
Absolutely.
It has really turned turned on its head, really, with regards to, again, people that may be online thinking, well, and I know this happened also 4 weeks ago, so we'll bring this into play a little bit, that I know I have a contractor agreement, and that's probably exactly what you said then, Keeley, with regards to it really doesn't matter what agreement you have if the old scenario, if you look and smell like a duck, you're probably a duck.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Precisely. You know, I've had, yeah, quacks like a duck, it is a duck. That's one of the phrases I will often, talk about with clients. So yeah, absolutely, Paul.
So what do we say to people that are in that direct hire situation right now? Not that I want you to give advice, but you were pretty clear in what you just said then, but for people that are sitting back and going, well, okay, well, like that firm, sort of 4 weeks ago, where they've got 10 to 15 people over in the Philippines directly hired, not through an MSA. What do we say to those guys?
Look, I definitely think a two-part strategy is probably needed in these situations. And the first would be, can you consider putting in a jurisdictional separation? So can you consider, if you are engaging directly, if you have an offshore entity to engage through if possible, create a clear separation from your employment Australian operations. But also, if you're in a position to understand those local employment laws in the worker's country, I'm very conscious of the fact that a lot of people don't have those resources. So, secondly, if Australian law is going to apply here, ensuring that is a genuine contract relationship. And, that's where these August 2024 changes have become so critically important for businesses to understand. And, applying that whole relationship test means, looking at how that work is performed under the contract is critical. And to establish that genuine nature, you really need to start looking at things like control, giving real autonomy to those contractors over how the work is performed. This is absolutely going to be a key factor in determining that classification. A true contractor should have meaningful autonomy over how they complete their work. Another thing will be payment. So, I certainly like project-based fees rather than hourly wages. And hourly wages was something that was pulled up in this judgment as a determining feature as well for that employee classification. Risk, a contractor runs their own business. They should bear genuine business risk. So if that's absent, then it's not necessarily looking towards a genuine relationship. True contractors should also be able to delegate or subcontract work, and definitely maintaining that clear separation between your business and that of your contractor. So keeping internal business operations separate. Another thing will be ensuring that they aren't exclusive to your business. So they should be able to have multiple clients. Like I said, they are running a business themselves. And that's something that this judgment actually emphasised, that Joanna was not conducting her own business. And so ensuring that your contractors are able to have multiple clients, they have their own business structure and ability to grow their own practice, certainly key features. And look, I definitely think that for businesses concerned about compliance in this regard, using established outsourcing providers to directly employ those workers, like Profitmaster, can absolutely add that layer of protection there to create a clear separation between your business and the offshore worker, which is, what I spoke about before with that jurisdictional separation. So, look, if you are considering changes to how work's performed, definitely consider how those changes are going to be impacted under this new whole relationship test that the Commission now require.
And what would you say to let's say somebody chose to do this from 1 July, but they've been direct with people over the last 12 months for the previous financial year or for the current financial year. Is there a way that they can protect themselves for this financial year?
Look, definitely being proactive. If you are looking to change business structure or anything to do in that regard, being proactive and looking at how those contractors are actually performing that work. And if that means realigning multiple aspects or just a few aspects of control or how payments made or delegation of work, these are all things that you need to be proactive about, because if you're not going to be proactive about them, cases like this are starting to become quite popular, and you don't want to be that business that has penalties imposed on them or orders for back pay or, payment of retrospective employment entitlements. It's a massive financial burden and a reputational burden to wear. So, getting your ducks in order now, and reviewing your actual arrangements in place.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Rich, anything you want to add to that, mate?
Look, Keely's right on with that. And I'll just go back to a couple of comments that you made, Keely, relating to working with an entity, an overseas entity. Well, in actual fact, we provide that, the employee of record. And that is a great way for somebody to step out of direct hire across into a style of doing business that's going to be more likely to be a genuine contractor relationship than a current direct hire. I'm not saying it can't be done as a direct hire. I'm just saying that minimising the risks here. And then from there, you can start to build the relationship that you want. I spoke about equipment a little bit earlier. The provider can make a decision. You and the provider can make a decision about who provides the equipment. You can go and analyse the capability of the person working in a secure environment. You can check the device for what it's capable of doing. What happens if it gets stolen? Those sorts of things. What happens if it's being used when it shouldn't be used? And then it can be taken a step further, and you're probably going beyond the direct hire position here, or the employer of record. You can start to talk about operations manager, about payroll, provision of payroll, looking after stat benefits, and then it becomes even more separate between the team member and the Australian company. So, you can, it's almost as if you could build it yourself, working with somebody, a good provider who's already doing it, such as Profitmaster.
And I suppose the key is, like what you're talking about, have that conversation with the provider. So if the Australian entity is looking to change that structure in sense, have the conversation with you as an example, Rich, to say, well, what do I need to move towards to then further protect myself in the future? And it's not just, and I know we've had companies, I've had accountants that have spoken to me about, oh, well, we'll just set up a entity over in the Philippines. That's not that easy, is it?
No.
There's a reason why you've invested so heavily into what you've done over there and the operation that you've got running over there. So it's not just a matter of just setting up a company in the Philippines, because again,
different administrative environment, all sorts of issues, but
correct.
Anyway.
Yeah. Now we've got to 1:30. So what I'll do is I'll just ask anybody, if you've got questions, to please throw them in there. We're going to quickly talk about MSA, but if you've got questions, please drop them into the Q&A bar where Richard or Keeley can answer those for you. I think that's going to be pretty important. So before we go to questions, and hopefully there are some coming through because there's quite a few members online, and whether you're an accounting firm, or I think the other opportunity that exists here, if you're an accounting firm, is to start having conversations with your clients. Because again, this is a compliance issue, I suppose, for your clients, that if they could be, I don't know, a metal manufacturing company out in Dandenong, I'll just pick a suburb in Melbourne, and again, they're running a huge plant out there, and you've got the ability to have that conversation with them to the risks to their business. That's fair to say as well, isn't it, Rich?
It certainly is, and it's not just the HR compliance or fair work compliance, but there's all sorts of compliance issues that when you're dealing with an offshore environment, you need to be considering. And, I touched on security earlier, but I'm an accountant by trade, as you know, Paul, but we have ethical standards on this. There are security standards, or information security standards around this, the Privacy Act, all sorts of legislation that we have in Australia that you need to be thinking about when you're dealing with these offshore environments, and then you haven't even started on the foreign environment. So absolutely, I mean, these are things that if you are an accounting firm, consider how they're working down inside your client base. That if they're hiring direct, then they may have exactly the same problems as what you're having if you're hiring direct.
Yeah. That's a good point. I'll go to a question. I've got Anthony here. How are you, mate? Good to always have you online and be contributing, so thank you. Has there been a cost-benefit analysis done going direct versus Profitmaster?
Should I answer that?
Yeah, you can answer that, mate.
Okay, so look, it's quite easily explained. The cost difference is consisting in three parts. One is that when you're working with us, we are fully compliant with the Philippines labour laws. In fact, we're an A-class employer with the Department of Labour over there. So that means that we're not only paying wages, our salaries, but we're also paying statutory benefits, and we're also compliant with the with international labour laws such as modern slavery and things like that. Already checked out. Then on top of that, we have what we call our corporate benefits, which are things like we have a caterer coming in each day. We have buses pick up people, take them home in the afternoon. We have various social get-togethers and everything like that. So we divide that first part up into salaries, statutory benefits, and then company benefits. Those are overall employment benefits. Now, on top of that, we then have our management fees, which consist of the pay service, HR, recruitment, performance views through our team leaders, full-time IT management, and so on. They are our management services. And then underneath that, we have an office subscription, which basically covers the cost of the seat that they're sitting on, the cost of the real estate that they're engaged in, the electricity, the utilities, the computer, all of those other things that go to make up running a person inside an office. So they're the security, they're the subscription levels. So to give you an idea, we treat it as being the management services and the subscription as being one charge, and then the employees on the other side. So the cost benefit really comes into, well, what is it that you see as benefits of working with somebody such as us versus having somebody sitting at home? One of the benefits I suggest might be that somebody sitting at home, sitting at a computer for 8 hours a day is not going to have the same experience as somebody who's working in an office. Now, that has an effect on longevity of the staff member. Somebody who's sitting in the office all day for 8 hours a day, sitting at work at home for 8 hours a day, may not have the collaboration relationship that they can have with their team leaders and checking on how they're going, just checking it out. Holidays are better provided in a work office rather than working from home. So they're some of the benefits on the side of the employee. I'll now use the employee name because they are actually employees of ours. And then there's other things that the employer, the Australian firm, might be thinking about, which is, well, you get a brand new computer that's unaffected by anything that's being dealt with by the employee sitting in the office, sitting at home. So you're not going to have any data risks coming out of that device because of the security overlay that goes over the top of it. So there's one benefit there. Things like what happens to the machine if it gets lost. Somebody like our machine, if you've got our machines, they shut down. They can't be used if they're stolen or whatever like that. So there's no risk that somebody could jump inside it. We have a security overview that means that we can see what the staff member is doing hour to hour, minute to minute. So we can actually see if they're deviating from what their instructions are to be able to work on. Now, we're not trying to spy on people, but it's just being able to say, well, are things being done that should be being done? So hopefully you can see then that, it's much more than just sitting somebody in a room, whether they've got air conditioning or not, but it's more than just sitting somebody in a room. It's saying this is a genuine employee that needs to be catered for like an employee, and I expect them to perform like an employee. That's what you get when you're working with a provider.
That's a good point. And mate, one of the things that didn't get asked, let's call it a month ago, was, let's say we've got people online and we just spoke about the opportunity that exists for, let's say, accountants to talk to clients. If people have got offshore direct hires right now and they want to de-risk that, is that something that, from a service point of view, Profitmaster can provide just from an employment perspective?
Definitely. So that's what I was referring to about the employer of record. And I think Keeley would agree with me. That's step one. That's step one. At least you're creating I'll call it a fence between the Australian operation and the person overseas. So absolutely, we can do that for staff. I mean, we've got a number of support tools that we provide for our clients. That's one of them. But I mean, it could even go so far as if people wanted to bring their staff over from Philippines to Australia for training, for engagement with the team and so on, we actually facilitate the visas and the airfares and everything for them to come over. So it's part of what you get is much more than just a person with a computer.
Yep. Got a follow-up question from Anthony here. PI insurance for the Australian accountant.
Okay, so we've actually checked this out with the Institute of Chartered Accountants. Because of the relationship that we have, it's not a requirement that we have to have professional indemnity insurance. Okay. So our service arrangements actually provide the requirement to instruct the staff member is actually with the accountant in Australia, and that's dealt with in our service agreements.
Beautiful. Question here from Steve. Good to have you online, Steve. Is your monthly fee the same for all staff? How much is your fee? There may be different conversations, but you can answer that, mate.
The answer is yes, absolutely. It's exactly the same for all clients, for all staff. The difference is that we also have discounts starting from 5 staff, 10 staff, 15 staff, 20 staff, and upwards. So you as soon as you've got 5 staff, you'd already be saving money, and very happy to discuss those discounts. If Steve wants to discuss that more closely, I'd be very happy to take that offline and go into detail about what we would be charging.
Yeah, brilliant. Final words, Keeley? Richard?
I love the questions. I want more.
I love it.
Anything final you want to wrap up with?
Oh, look, I've enjoyed it, Paul. As I say, as you said at the start, this is the second round for us in relation to this. It really is a topical conversation, and lovely to see the people who've come on board. Certainly, if they would like to reach out to us to discuss how we can help them, you can share that with them after here. But also, Keeley, thank you very much for making your time available, your very valuable time available to talk through the legal aspects of this. It's a very important thing that we have to consider.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Love it. It's a good topic to talk about. It's very topical at the moment, and I think it's only going to become, more closely scrutinised as time goes on. And if the courts don't want to change their position on it again, it looks like this one might be here to stay for a little bit.
Oh, we've got a late question coming here, so I'll throw it at you.
Oh.
Hi, Paul Keeley. I was a little bit late to the webinar. Was minimum wage as a part of the NES addressed after the court case? Does this now require direct hires to be paid minimum wage?
Well, yes, sorry, Roger. It was addressed with respect to the court case, simply because she wasn't being paid national minimum wage. But with respect to direct hires, if you're going through an agent? I mean, if you're going through an agency, that's something that Richard can address. But if you're directly engaging as a contractor, then I mean, your fee would be your fee. But yes, I would, for the sake of protection, and certainly not legal advice, guidance, but definitely ensuring that it's above minimum wage in Australia, if there is a risk of it being deemed an employee, would be very helpful.
Well answered.
So I've just answered that in relation to the Philippines. The first thing is that everybody in the minimum wage in the Philippines is about 15,000 pesos a month, which is about $400 a month. Okay. Now, people will say, "Oh, well, is that why I saw on the internet that I can hire a 4 or 5 year old CPA, 4 or 5 years experienced CPA in a specialist field on Australian taxation, for example, for $400 or $500 a month?" No, it's not that at all. In actual fact, accountants and professional staff in the Philippines are paid very, very well by their local standards. But that's not to say that they're the same as Australian standards. I mean, it's a different environment working over there. But I can assure you that that our people are paid well above the minimum pay requirements. But I would reinforce what Keeley said in relation to that contractual arrangement on a direct hire. If there is a risk that you could fall subject to the Fair Work rules, you're better off erring on the safe side. Yeah.
Agree. Well, thank you, Keeley. Thank you,
Absolute
Richard.
pleasure.
It's been fantastic having you both.
Thanks, Paul.
Again, not only answer the questions, but to share in depth this case as well and the risks that are associated. To all of you guys that have joined us, thank you for being a part of this. Again, if you want to know more, reach out to Keeley, reach out to Richard. I'm sure they'll be happy to have conversations with you guys, but hopefully we've pointed you in the right direction to what you should be doing next. Signing off till I see you guys next time. Thank you again, Keeley. Thank you again, Richard. Talk soon.
Thanks,
Thanks
Paul.
very much.
Thank you.
See you,
Thanks, everyone.
Keeley.
Bye.
See you, everyone.